Hey folks, it's time, your frugal prepper. I'm here on the wife's little Buick Encore. This is 2016 or 17 or something. Take one of two oil filters. I don't know which one, so I bought them both. I'll take the wrong one back. Somebody stripped out the drain plug on this too. I had a heck of a time getting that off, so I'm gonna have to go up and get me another drain plug. But these engines are the same that are in the Chevy Cruzes and stuff. It's the 1.4 liter turbo. See the little turbocharger down there. They have their issues. So this new, they've redone the intake so that it doesn't suck the ball out of them. But they have an EGR valve under this cover that goes bad quite often. And the turbos are known for locking up. And every one of these I've done a turbo on. And this is a pretty simple turbo to do. It's not too terribly bad. But while you're doing it, there is an oil cooler and there are articulating coolant lines behind that turbo. You might as well replace those too because they're known failure. The oil cooler gasket and the articulating coolant lines. If you have to replace one, do those too. But these are known for the oil feed line plugging up. Every single one of these I've done a turbo on, that oil feed line's been plugged solid. Now, the oil drain line is plastic. It's going to break if you take it off. The bolts that hold the turbo onto the intake are technically torque to yield, so you're supposed to replace them. I have done them without replacing them and haven't had any problems. And to get this turbo from the manufacturer is about $1,700–1,800. To get an aftermarket one on Amazon, $500–600. And honestly, I've had some that I've done factory ones on come back a second time, and I haven't replaced any of the aftermarket ones yet that I put on. So, but this oil feed line, it starts out right here. It's right there, and it runs under this cover and goes into the turbo. And it's baking in between this heat shield and the turbo, which is the exhaust manifold, and it cooks it. And it cooks the oil in it, and it gets plugged solid and cuts off the oil feed to the turbo. So every 50,000 miles or so, you just go buy this new turbo oil feed line. Now, I normally put AC Delcos on, the genuine part. This is a Dorman. Nobody has the AC Delco in stock, including all the dealerships around me. Nobody's got one. So we're going to do the Dorman. I mean, it's just an oil line. It passes oil. It should be fine. The early ones, they didn't have any of this heat protective coating stuff on it. And that's their latest attempt to try to make it less likely to plug up. But they still plug up. That little piddly-ass heat shield doesn't make a bit of difference. There's also a problem with these leaking. And so the older ones only had a single O-ring on them. The new ones have a dual O-ring to help them seal better, which solves the oil leak problem. So these are really easy to do. Just have to get some E-Torx, take off these two bolts. This cover lifts off, and then you take off one E-Torx there, and you get a big hex and take this banjo bolt loose, and you put that in there. Now, I will say that if you get the OEM one, you better get the new banjo bolt and the new banjo bolt gasket, because it doesn't come with the line. On the Dorman, it does come with those two parts. The banjo bolt can also get plugged up with carbon. It's a little tiny passageway. So you want to make sure you keep the oil feeding clean. And if you just put this on, you know, say 50–60,000 miles, or do it more than that. Do it at 30,000. It's a pretty cheap part, and it's pretty easy to replace while you're doing an oil change. And it'll keep the turbo from scattering, and you'll have a big repair bill. So I'll go ahead and get my E-Torx out, and we'll take this off, and I'll kind of take you through in sections and show you what I'm doing. So in case you're wanting to know, this takes an E10, so that if you're only doing this one particular job on your car and you don't use a lot of E-Torx, this car has a lot of E10s on it. It might be worth investing in some E10s because all your valve cover bolts, everything, all E-Torx. So we're just going to go ahead and put this on here and take these two bolts out right here and lift this cover off. Okay, so this one has a third bolt right there. So I took those two out, and you come down the cover. Right there's a third bolt. I'm thinking the last one of these I didn't have that third bolt, but it was like a 2010 or something. So maybe that's something they've added, or maybe it's always supposed to have been there, or I just forgot it was there. But we'll take that bolt out, and then we'll lift this cover off. Okay, so now all three of those bolts are out, and this cover should just lift up out of here. It will. It will. Come on. It's going to be a little stubborn. There we go. Alright, you just have to work it a little bit, but it lifts out of there. And now you can see your turbo, and you see this oil feed line. It comes in right here, goes back under the manifold, over to here, and there's another E-Torx bolt on it. So basically, you're just going to take that E-Torx bolt loose, take this hex loose, and pop this line off, and then slide the new one back in there under the turbo. But you can see where that's the exhaust manifold is built onto the turbo, and that's where that oil feed line is running right under there, picking up all that heat, baking the carbon and the oil in it. So you get a little behind on your oil changes, this is going to plug up, and it's probably going to plug up anyway over time. So I always change these around 50 or 40% oil use. I don't wait till it goes down to 0 to change them, because you are killing your turbo when you do that. So this one here appears to be something that's a little in between a T40 and a T45, but a T40 will take these out normally. It just has a little tiny bit of play in it, and a T45 won't fit. So that's what we're going to use. And this is on the factory bolt. The one that comes with the aftermarket OEM Dorman, or the aftermarket Dorman, is a hex. So we'll have to get a hex socket for that guy. But this one's definitely a star bit. And like I said, I'd replace that banjo bolt when you do this, because that's another potential restriction. None of these bolts are very tight or have very much torque on them. So really, you just snap them loose and they spin out by hand pretty much. I think that's all the way out now. So now we're just ready to pull this oil line back out of here. We'll start at this end, give her a little tug, and she comes loose, as you can see. Then you can sneak her back out of here, like so. And there's the original one. It's hard to tell if it's really plugged up, but we can try blowing through it here. Let's see. It's still flowing, but it's got a little restriction to it. It's not full open, you can tell. So yeah, it was definitely that time. So we'll get the new one on there. There's definitely a bigger opening in this one. It really is free when you're blowing through it. You can tell that other one had already started to restrict a little bit, so we got her just in time. All right, so we'll get this put on here, and I just consider this preventative maintenance. I mean, you just got to do it. You could probably try spraying the old one out with some brake clean or something, but I think for the $13, you're far better off just to replace these every so often. So this particular aftermarket one was off about 1/4 of an inch or so. So I had to get my pry bar out and lock it against this bolt down here, and just pry back on it just a little bit there to get it to kind of bend just a little tiny bit and go down in that hole. I've never had that with the OEM ones, so it must be a Dorman thing. But it's in there. I don't think that's too big of a deal. And it is cheaper. Like the OEM with the bolt and the gasket's going to cost you around $35. This is $13 for everything, so they can't make them perfect, I guess. So now I'm just going to take and put this bolt back down there, and it holds that in, and then we'll tighten up this banjo bolt. I got it finger tight, but we'll tighten it up the rest of the way, and then this should be good to go. Okay, we're tightening in this banjo bolt. Again, this doesn't have to be like super crazy tight, so I'm I'm tightening it with my hand way up here on the ratchet so I don't over tighten it. And that's good. And that's actually a hex, but T30 fits it perfect. And now I'll just tighten down this other bolt down here. And again, these weren't super tight to begin with, so I'm not gonna go crazy with them. Okay, so here it is. Everything's tightened up, the line's replaced. Everybody's happy. So now we're just gonna put our cover back on and put it back down in here. And we'll get those bolts in. And you just gonna have to wiggle it around until she goes in place. And then put the 3 bolts back in, and you're set. It's going to save you from a really expensive repair. You know, to get these done at the dealership, it's going to be like $2,700 or something. So it's a significantly expensive repair, and this is a really cheap and easy preventative thing to help keep that repair from happening. All right, there we go. So I think they put these in the Chevy Sidekicks, these motors. They put them in the Chevy Cruzes. They put them in the Buick Encores. They put them in all kinds of stuff. But if you're dealing with one of these turbocharged motors, doing this little repair will probably take you like 5 minutes. It costs $20. Do it once every 50,000 miles, and your turbo will probably last forever. You probably will take your turbo off to replace the coolant lines and the oil cooler seals long before the turbo itself actually goes bad. But, all right, well, I'm going to finish up this oil change and get back inside. I'll talk to y'all later. This is Tom, your Frugal Prepper.